Hi there, my name is Sarah Barton, and I will be talking about my Research for Interventions project. So we're going to start off talking about reading acquisition. Reading acquisition is learning and comprehending what you're reading. It's the practice of skills necessary to understand the meaning behind written words. Essentially, this is literacy in a nutshell. And literacy is an individual's ability to speak, read, and write in order to function adequately in one's daily environment. And why is this important? It's important because children need to learn how to comprehend, use phonics, vocabulary, speak, read, and write in order to move on into upper grade levels. A child without a reading deficiency in 6th grade should be able to spell at or above the reading level using vocabulary. This would be speaking vocabulary of about 3,000 words using syllables and affixes. The average words per minute would be 160 to 180. Cognitive abilities would include concrete operational period. This is where children begin applying logic and reasoning to concrete events. They also begin interpreting background knowledge. For oral and written language, 6th graders should be reading grade level books fluently, writing with comprehension by having sight word vocabulary and decoding strategies, and using vocabulary effectively in writing and varying their sentence structure. For language acquisition, this would include word recognition, and the reading level would be 5.5 and above. This is a chart showing teachers the 6th grade standards and also showing teachers what is expected of 6th graders without reading deficiencies. So these would include oral expression and listening, reading for all purposes, writing and composition, and research and reasoning. So this is essentially for reading, writing, and communication, and these are the expectations for 6th graders. A little bit about my case study student. She's a female in 6th grade who prefers nonfiction and fiction books specifically about horses. Her favorite book is Black Beauty. She does not like reading aloud and prefers individual silent reading. And her reading level is a 3.5 to 4.0 on the scale. I administered numerous assessments to my case study student to get to know her better and to figure out what areas that she can grow in the most. The first one that I administered is called an interest inventory. In this inventory, I asked her questions about her hobbies and her interests. Mainly, this helps me in planning lessons and activities that cater to her, and it also helps me when figuring out what I want to do for my interventions and what will motivate her the most. The second assessment that I administered is called a comprehension inventory. In this assessment, I read her the book Something Beautiful and asked her to retell this to me. After she retold me the story, I asked her a few comprehension questions. After I administered the comprehension inventory, I asked her, "What is your something beautiful?" and asked her to write down a sentence for me. This was my third assessment, called the writing assessment. Next, I administered a running record assessment. I used a passage about Amelia Earhart, which I'll be talking about in the next slide. Next, I used the Words Their Way elementary spelling inventory. In this assessment, I said a word, used the word in a sentence, then said the word again. An example of this would be boat. I saw the boat in the harbor, boat. And then my case study student would spell the word boat on her paper. For the next assessment, we were asked to create a writing assessment. So we collaborated with our 6th grade teachers and decided to focus it around comparing plant and animal cells using key vocabulary words. I asked my case study student to write a 3 to 4 sentence summary of the cell video that we watched in class. She has great comprehension and uses vocabulary in the correct context. Lastly, I began my interventions by reading her the first chapter of the Saddle Club book series. I chose this book series because it caters to her interests and would motivate her to read. I read the entire first chapter to her, then chose a small passage out of that book and asked her to read it aloud to me using the same expression that I used. This would monitor her reading rate and her expression, and on a larger scale, her fluency in general. The running records assessment was conducted at a 4.0 reading level, and it was about Amelia Earhart. I began by asking my case study student concept questions, which included, who was Amelia Earhart? What are the dangers of flying a small plane? What is an adventurer? And what are women's rights? All of these questions sparked her background knowledge about Amelia Earhart and anything that she may have knew previous to reading the running record. After I asked her these questions, I asked her to predict what we would be reading about. And she said about Amelia Earhart flying a small plane across the world, which is essentially correct. Next, I gave her copy of the Amelia Earhart running record, and I kept mine. As she read, I put check marks above the correct words that she said, and I made lines above any of the miscues that she had. In total, my case study student had 11 miscues, which means she's at the instructional reading level. For the majority of her miscues, she would mispronounce or missay a vocabulary word, but then self-correct herself. And partway through the running record, she skipped about 2 sentences, which may have been just by accident. After calculating all of the miscues, I came to the conclusion that her reading rate is 72 words per minute. Now, compared with the average norm of a 6th grade student, this is very low. This running record was definitely a challenge for my case study student, but it was not at the frustration level because she's at the instructional level based on the number of her miscues. After reading, I asked my case study student some comprehension questions, which she did great with. She got almost 100% in her comprehension questions, which tells me that she's one of the few students who seems to be very good at comprehension, but not so good at fluency. And it's interesting because usually fluency and comprehension go hand in hand, but she is the rare case. So let's take a look at my case study student compared with other 6th graders and her peers in the normal range. So after giving the assessments to my case study student, I found that she definitely struggles with spelling because less than half were correct when given the Words Their Way elementary spelling inventory. I also found that through the running records, her average words per minute fell between 70 and 80, and compared with the average norm of a 6th grader, which is 160 to 180, that's a really low reading rate. And this shows me that my case study student may struggle with fluency. When I administered the comprehension inventory, I saw that she was very high performing and she was high scoring on her comprehension assessment and her retelling, in addition to her running records assessment, where she had a high instructional level, which was 7 out of 8 correct on her comprehension questions. Again, this seems a little strange because fluency and comprehension normally do go hand in hand, but in this case, my case study student is very high performing in comprehension and low scoring in fluency. For her writing assessments, I saw that her written language is very good. She gave a great science summary writing assessment and was able to comprehend well and put thoughts on paper in a cohesive structure. She used vocabulary effectively and varied her sentence structure. She could recognize words, which shows me that she is very good in her language acquisition as well. My case study student's reading level is at a 3.5 to a 4.0. And compared with the average reading level of a 6th grader, where the reading level range falls between a 5.0 and above, this is definitely on the lower scale as well. So after administering my assessments and comparing my case study student with the average 6th grader, I've concluded that the impeding factor is definitely fluency, and more specifically, her reading rate and expression. Fluency is the ability to read with speed, accuracy, and proper expression, and some characteristics of fluency is that children must be able to read fluently, whether they are reading aloud or silently. When reading aloud, fluent readers read in phrases and add intonation appropriately. Reading is smooth and has expression. For my research, I will be using the fluency rating scale as seen below. So for number 1, it's going to be little to no fluency. Number 2, it's going to be some fluency. Number 3, adequate fluency. And number 4, proficient fluency. My case study student. So on the fluency rating scale, my case study student most aligns with number 2, which is some fluency. There's 4 characteristics underneath that, which are rate, punctuation, expression, and phrasing. Under rate, my case study student's pacing is definitely slow, as seen in her low reading rate, which is 72 words per minute. She may take several breaks, have extended pauses, and repeat some words or self-correct herself on some vocabulary that she sees. Under punctuation, she may try punctuation or she might attempt at punctuation and it turns out to be an inappropriate use of punctuation. So an example of this could be pausing where there is no comma. Under expression, there may be attempted expression, or she may not attempt expression at all. So her voice could be very monotone and she could skip over periods, punctuation marks, exclamation points, or it may not even be used appropriately. So an example of this could be if there's a sentence that says, I got an F on my report. Someone who struggles with fluency and expression, instead of saying that in a sad voice, they may say, I got an F on my report, because they don't know how to use expression properly. Underneath phrasing, my case study student may frequently read in 2-word phrases with some 3 or 4-word groupings. So an example of this could be chunking her words, and she may still have some word-by-word reading. So every single student that struggles with fluency and specifically reading rate or expression would fall under the some fluency category under the fluency rating scale, and this is specifically where my case study student is at right now. So how is fluency and specifically reading rate and expression affecting my case study student and impeding her? So my case study student feels stuck when she tries to read long passages aloud, or frankly read anything aloud. She takes a long time to read something, which impacts her reading rate as seen on the running records, and she gets frustrated when asked to read more than a paragraph aloud. Her lack of confidence will definitely impede her growth and motivation, and her lack of fluency will cause my case study student to fall behind in class, therefore affecting her in her upper grades. And this is already seen in her reading level when she's at a 4.0, when she should be at a 5.5 or above. And I'm definitely really excited to see how these interventions will help her grow and succeed in the classroom. So now that I know what the impeding factor is for my case study student, I can start thinking about and coming up with different interventions to help her grow and succeed in the classroom. Something that I've already started to do in the classroom is the repeated and choral reading of the Saddle Club book series, which I will continue. And I'll begin taking numerical data based on the reading fluency scale as talked about previously. I will compare her reading from before and after I read aloud to her to see if her expression or reading rate changes at all. I can chart her improvement and chart her growth to show her that she's doing better, and this can definitely motivate her to become a better reader. A couple interventions for helping her with her expression is that I can ask her to match her voice and expression to mine when we're reading aloud. So I can read aloud first, then she can read aloud, and she can try to copy my expression, or we could both read aloud at the same time, and she could try to copy my rate and my expression. Second, I can have her practice reading a passage with a certain emotion that I ask of her, which could be sadness or excitement. And I could ask her to invoke these emotions, which would definitely help with her expression. I feel like I've learned so much from this project already, even though I'm just getting started with my interventions. I've learned how to administer all types of assessments and to focus my research on the areas that my case study student needs improvement and growth in. This research gives me the chance to directly impact the academic growth of specifically one student, which is really, really awesome. This research helps me plan for my interventions because based on the outcomes of my assessments, I've decided to focus my interventions primarily on improving my case study student's reading rate and expression, which is overall her fluency. I can plan my interventions based off of these bases. I've also learned that it is critically important to take numerical data, record observations, and record students' behavior when I'm a future teacher. I've also learned that it is important to give assessments to track students' growth throughout the year to better differentiate for individual students. And here's my references. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.